Hello, how are you? It's really good to be back. It's been a while since I've been on YouTube. I have been working on the launch of my Psychic Initiation self-paced video course, which is finally out. You can go check it out on YouTube, get the first lesson for free. There's a whole course preview on my website. If you've ever wanted to develop your psychic abilities and see yourself more deeply, this is the course for you. Let's get stuck into today's video. This saved my life. Now, I'm not even being dramatic. I was so close to being institutionalized. It's actually a running joke with my best friend about how insane I used to be. Imagine me introducing myself to just a bunch of normal people saying that I'm a psychic witch and that's what I do as my profession. Now, even saying that, people have judgments. Why would anyone actually do that as a job? Like, it's quite funny, but it's the very thing that saved my life. Because before I came into my purpose, I was pretending to be something that I wasn't, and I didn't even realize it. So the thing that saved my life was creating separation from my mind. Now, what does that even mean? I'm going to try and explain it as simply as I possibly can so you too can actually start this process. Now, what will this actually do? Well, as a professional psychic, it has made me very psychic and very successful at what I do because I'm able to differentiate between psychic information and my mind. And if you're a magical practitioner, a spiritualist, or an occultist, this is something that you need to learn about as well because it allows you to strengthen your magic abilities. It allows you to know the difference between what's your mind and what's the actual magic. And especially if you're working with spirits or angels, you'll be able to connect to them and hear them more clearly. So let's chat about it. Now, here's the first point. You are very identified with your mind. Now, what does this mean? This means that we believe what we think. We believe what our mind has convinced us of, the reality it's put us into, the fantasy it's portrayed, and the persona it's created to ultimately protect ourselves and cope with living in this world. The problem with this is a lot of it isn't even true, and you don't even know what you're thinking or where your thoughts are actually coming from. Now, what does this even mean? And this is me speaking from experience of reading thousands of people's subconscious and doing readings with them where they look at what is actually blocking them. And it's always something that they never realized or connected to, but when they did, it made perfect sense. So what your mind is amazing at is convincing you of things. It knows you better than you know yourself. It's worked out exactly what it needs to say to you to get you to do something so it keeps you safe. It keeps you in that coping mechanism. It's terrified of you being outside of your coping mechanisms, your addictions, or your safe environment, whatever it believes is safe. So what's happening is we're believing the thoughts at the front. Whenever we make a decision, our mind has justified it, it's thought it through, it's told us all the things we need to hear, it's made us feel particular things so that we go and choose that path. But what happens with this is if you're finding yourself repeating the same old patterns that are giving you the same results that aren't aligned with your goals or the person you want to be, that means your mind has convinced you of something and you're not even aware of it. Most of the time we hear the thoughts at the front, but we don't hear the thoughts at the back. And what this means is you don't actually know what you're really thinking deeply. There's a lot that's going on in here that we're completely unaware of because we've never been taught how to actually observe the mind. And this is what I mean by you are not your thoughts. You are not your mind. And I know this is a pretty cliche spiritual thing to say. We hear it all the time. We go, yeah, I'm not my thoughts. I'm not my mind. But then we actually do the things that our mind convinces us of, which means we are very identified with that thought process. Now, with the subconscious, how it works is it's having its own experience in the background. It's where we actually make decisions from. So in the subconscious there's a lot of suppressed things that we've pushed down or pushed away, or even repressed, which means we don't even remember them or we can't even connect to it. And this is where we really make decisions from. So if you had a traumatic childhood or you've experienced any type of trauma, you're actually making decisions from these experiences. If you haven't done any work on them, if you haven't processed the emotions, if you pushed them away or denied it actually existed, this is what's actually happening. You're making decisions from those spaces, which is why these patterns continue. You can't move forward, you choose the same relationships, you're afraid of sharing your expression, starting your own business, whatever it is. It means there's something happening in the background that we haven't been able to connect to because our mind has distracted us in the front. The extreme problems with not having separation of the mind is it can create intense fantasies. So an extreme version of this would be narcissistic personality disorder. What generally happens with narcissists is their mind convinces them of a fantasy. So if you look at grandiose narcissism, the fantasy is, I am amazing. And we see this in the spiritual world a lot. It's like the guru complex. I'm the one that's talking to God. I'm the only one that can channel this information. I see people's souls. All that crap that they carry on with, that is a fantasy that their mind has convinced them of, which means their mind is split. They have pushed away the part of themselves that they believe is inadequate and not special. So what's probably happened with someone like this is when they were younger, they experienced some form of intense neglect, which made them believe that they are horrible, not a good person, not lovable, and not special. Now, what the mind has done to survive is it's identified that part of them and then it's pushed it away as far as possible. Then it's created the fantasy up here that this person, that I am amazing, I am a guru, I am special, I need people to validate this fantasy. This is why narcissists are so rampant in the spiritual community, because they have the I am special complex and I need you to believe that I am special as well to continue to validate this fantasy. And anyone that pushes up against this fantasy, I will push away. Now, I'm sure you've experienced this whenever you have come across these types of people that claim they are special and have all the answers and are the guru, and you're like, dude, you're full of BS, and they immediately try to shame you, disconnect from you, push you down. That this is what's happening. They've become very identified with their mind. So this is a very extreme case. We all have this to some degree. Part of us wants to be chosen, part of us wants to be special, and we look for that validation unconsciously. And this is what can lead to spiritual narcissism, as I just covered before. Now, the reason I was nearly institutionalized is not because of I want to be special and I want to be chosen. It's because I was living in terror. I didn't understand how afraid I actually was. And all my decisions were coming from that place of fear. It wasn't until I was friends with a narcissist. This is something about narcissists that you should know. Anytime there's a narcissist in a group, they amplify the dysfunction of that group or that person. So when I was friends with this person, they amplified the dysfunction around my fear response and how I actually wasn't aware of it. They amplified it within me so I could actually see it. So thank you for that. When I started to notice that I was really afraid, and this was when I was just like starting to be a psychic, like I was training to be a psychic, and I worked out very quickly that my fear was stopping me from actually being intuitive. because the fear coated the intuition, and then everything I believed was coming from that fear. There was no clarity. So what I started to do, I was like, oh, there's something here. Like, I don't realize how afraid I am, but it's coming up. So I need to start observing it. So number one, learn to observe. Now, I've spoken about this before, but this is why. When you start to observe the mind, you create separation from it. Think about just generally observing something. There is a relationship that starts, and that becomes separate from you, so you can observe it, you can learn about it, you can gain data and information. So I started to observe when I was afraid, and what I started to pick up on was fear was coming in every time I was responding to something or I was making a decision. And I didn't realize. I was like, oh my God, I am terrified all of the time. There is anxiety in everything that I do. And this was the very thing that was leading me into states of psychosis and feeling gaslit and intense paranoia. And these are the things that I would have been institutionalized for. I remember actually going to my husband at the time when I was married, and this was quite a long time ago, speaking into how crippling my anxiety was and how like trying to get help for it was really difficult. And looking back at that time, it was like, oh my God, I'm surprised that I didn't get institutionalized then because of the severity of it. Even though I was aware of the anxiety, I was not aware of the level and the depth of the anxiety that I was experiencing. So coming back to observing the fear, I started to observe the fear. Now, what this allowed me to do, and this is weeks of observation, this isn't one day. I just have to put in a little side note here. When you start observing, the mind is going to be very clever at convincing you to forget about it, not do it, or tell you that you've already done it enough and you understand it. It's all good now. You've fixed that. It's not how it works. This is your mind coming in and it's trying to stop you. Your mind wants you to stay dependent on what it's created for you. It wants you to stay in the coping mechanisms, the addictions, and the thought patterns and beliefs it's created for the reality which you function from. It wants you to stay there because it doesn't know about the unknown. It doesn't want you to change. So it'll pick up that you're doing it and it will convince you to stop doing it. So watch that come in, because when that's coming in, it actually means you're very close to seeing the reality of what's actually there. Now, when you see the reality of what's actually there, it's pretty confronting. So I thought I was high functioning, that I was amazing, that I had it all together, that I was very sane. But the truth was, I was the opposite of that. Now, this is where the persona is shattered. My mind had convinced me that I was something that I simply was not, because it didn't want me to feel the fear. Now, this is what happens with intense emotional experiences. When there isn't safety around processing, acknowledging, and working with those emotions, our mind suppresses and represses it. It's like, that's not safe. We can't deal with that right now. So we're going to convince you you are this, and then you become identified with this, and there's no separation. The observation leads you back to this. So now that I could observe my fear, I had choice. What am I going to do about this? I had two options. Go back to the part of the mind that I was originally identified with and convince myself that it wasn't as bad as what it was. Or do I get curious about this fear and do something about it? Now, because becoming a psychic I was so passionate about it, I had the right reason to go into this terror, and I needed the right reason. So I started to get help. I started to explore it. I started to go to therapy. Now, from then, I've actually gone through a few therapists. I did not stop. I found the right therapist for me that helped me process and sit with that terror and learn how to care for my mind. And that's a whole other video that I'm going to get into. But this is what saved my life. When I started to observe my mind, I created the separation from it. There was a relationship that was happening. I was looking at the distortion it was creating to distract me from the fear. Then, when I started to get an understanding of the level of fear I was functioning from, I then had a choice. What do I do with this? I started to get help. Now, this is the crossroads that you're going to hit. When you start to see who you really are and what the mind has convinced you of, this is where you have a decision. Do I want to become my authentic self, or do I want to live in the reality that my mind has convinced me of? Now, for me, if I'd stayed in that reality, I would be medicated and in an institution and absolutely not doing the work I'm doing today. That was the extreme of what I was avoiding. Because I decided to face it and continue to do work on it, I am this. I have an amazing business, I work with amazing people, and I absolutely adore what I do as a profession. So what I'm saying to you ultimately is the gift that you will receive from knowing and seeing your mind is you will ultimately come into your higher purpose. But be warned, it's really confronting. It's not an easy thing to undertake, and it's not something that's done simply or quickly. There are many layers to our experience. There are many parts of our mind to understand and interact with and learn about. This is a lifelong journey, but the rewards are incredible. You will come into your purpose, your gifts, and you will ultimately be able to be that thing that everyone in the spiritual community is trying to be. Authentic. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you've observed about your mind. I look forward to hearing from you.